I've been asked to come here and talk about, well, game design in Blackbox Larps, but mainly just Blackbox Larps. My name is Jesper. I've been larping for around 20 years or so, and been game designing or producing Larps for nearly as long. Well, in my professional life, I have a PhD in math, so I'm very accustomed to university life. And currently I work as a light design engineer, doing other lighting stuff not related to this here at all. I wanted to come here and talk about this because I am hoping that this Blackbox Larp community is something that is expanding, and we're receiving influx from a lot of different people with very different viewpoints in terms of game designing and arts and theater, because it's somewhere in like this gray area between a lot of disciplines. So therefore I would love to come here and hope that whatever you do here at this university maybe could be of interest to Blackbox Larping, and also the other way around, that whatever we do with Blackbox Larping could be of interest to the IT university. The first thing I encounter when I talk about LARP is that people have a lot of misconceptions. Let's see if this works. There we are. That most people think that LARP looks something like this. You see a lot of small kids. They're happy with swords in hand, and also even more swords and fighting. And while this is entirely true, a lot of this goes on in Denmark and the world, and kids LARPing has really spread out, also fantasy LARPing. This is not the entire truth. LARP can look in many ways, and the thing I'm going to talk about, Blackbox Larp, looks more like this. Could we perhaps kill the lights of this? Or maybe it's just me that I'm standing in a bad angle. So this is way more theatrical. It could also look like this. A little more hazy, people lying down. Or this. Somewhat more action going around. Or even this, people dancing. What is common for all of these is that what goes on happens inside a theater room. And it is most often black, therefore we call it black box. Also, that is usually what theater people would call that kind of theater room. So now that I have proven that LARP is many things, and this specific is not kids running around in the woods, I would go back to talk a little about what is LARP actually. So LARP is the acronym Live Action Role Playing, and that acronym has become a word in itself during the years. So therefore I can say I am a LARPer, I LARP, I have gone to a LARP is a word. And when we talk about what does it stand for, is that, well, role-playing refers to the changing of one's behavior to a certain rule. That's a role. That's a quote I've taken from Wikipedia. The actual definition of role-playing, where it comes from, what exactly does it mean, is a subject of much debate, both in our role-playing community and also on a worldly scale. So I will take this as sufficient, and also in this context we're talking about role-playing inside a game or some kind of structured play that is sort of implicitly assumed when we talk about role-playing, at least in our community. And then the two other words, live action, means that the role-playing you do, you convey that with live actions, means movements and words, and that is opposed to, for instance, pen and paper role-playing and computer role-playing, online role-playing, and many other forms. Funny thing is that a lot of people, also in our community, think that the words live action are actually two descriptions of what live role-playing is. It's both live, you do it here now, and it's action, which spells something like it's something with swords and a lot of stuff happening. But live action just means that you do your movements live and in the flesh. So onwards to the more a tradition in the Nordic countries that we call Nordic Larp. In the Nordic countries, there's been a strong tradition for role-playing and LARPing since at least the early 90s. Role-playing, pen and paper role-playing goes even further back, but the very strong tradition, I think, started around late 80s, early 90s. And live role-playing sort of evolved from that era. And then we have, in the Nordic countries, we have this conference called Knudepunkt in Danish. It has other names in the other Nordic countries because it's a conference that travels in Nordic countries. It started in Norway in '97, so next year will be in Norway again. It's the 20th anniversary. And that is a conference that gathered role players, LARPers from the different countries in the north, and they sort of got together and talked about what they did. And that, some years later, started sparking some kind of creative development, people inspiring each other. So this the development of LARP genres and formats and what can we do with LARP and all that stuff. And that happened from around 2000. So, and that movement and that those games are documented in this wonderful book here, which is called Nordic Larp, by Jakob Stenhorst and Markus Montela, which was published in 2010. So this is the strong tradition that Blackbox Larps comes from. Blackbox Larps then started around 2010 or to 12. That was like the early years of Blackbox Larping. There had been games before that used some of the techniques that are used in Blackbox Larps, but they were sort of like unique pieces from time to time, and they didn't spark any general trend. However, around 2010, something happened, and I have listed some interesting points here. If you're interested in the more in-depth story about how this happened, I recommend a very nice talk by Martin Nielsen from this year's Nordic Larp Talks, which sadly hasn't been put online yet, but it will be shortly, I'm sure. He tells the whole story. So in 2010, the game Delirium was one of the main focuses on the start of Blackbox Larping. I'm proud to say I was part of making that game. Also, the same year in Oslo, they started producing a small convention called Grenselandet, which initially was not about Blackbox Larps as such, but it quickly developed into being that. They were more focused on small-scale LARPs where you put tape on the floor from stuff, but then it gradually or quickly evolved into more black box kind of games. Also, 2011 had the largest produced black box game so far, Cabo, which was here in Copenhagen in some of the now torn down buildings at Carlsberg. And in 2012, we started producing Blackbox Copenhagen convention here in the center of Copenhagen. And also the same year, the Larp Writers Summer School started, which has become some kind of, a yearly school in summer where people go there and inspire each other and learn how to produce games. And many of those games that are produced there are Blackbox games or LARPs. I will probably use the word games and LARPs interchangeably. That's just my bad wording. What I'm talking about are LARPs. So games is perhaps defined otherwise, but so excuse me if I call something games when I shouldn't. So the current state of Blackbox Larping is that now Blackbox Larping is recognized as its own unique style of LARP. It has branched out from the larger movement called Nordic Larp, but I'm not sure it is defined specifically as a subcategory of Nordic LARP anymore. But that's a debate that has not yet been taken in the LARPing community. There are more separate Blackbox LARPing events in the Nordic countries and even beyond the Nordic countries than I can keep track of. And that's not just me being lazy and have lost the feeling of what goes on in the world. It is also a statement of Blackbox LARPing has spread out so much and it's become so diverse, and new events are popping up all the time. So it has moved to a point where you cannot no longer control it and keep track of it in general. Each of those events will produce between 5 and 15 Blackbox LARPs yearly. That's just numbers I take out of a hat or something like that. I don't know exactly, but I would say it's somewhere in between those two. And then there are summer schools where you can be taught about Blackbox LARPing and Blackbox LARP design. The Larp Writer Summer School is definitely one, but a new one is coming up in this year, which is not solely focused on Blackbox LARP, but it will be a part of it. Even though it seems to be growing bigger, it is still small. It is still in its pioneering phase. There's a lot of stuff that has still not been tried and tested, and there's a lot of stuff that can be done. So that was the short story of what Blackbox LARPs are and how they evolved. But then, what is it? From the pictures, I hope you can gather that this is something that happens inside a theater room. You have theater lighting, relatively few number of players, and they're being set to do something. A Blackbox LARP will usually last around 2 hours, so sometimes a little bit less, sometimes more, and then there's a few larger scale Blackbox LARPs that will take even longer, but they're very rare. So from the player's perspective, it is a playground. It's free. You can go there and you can play, and most of the larps that are being created, they're trying to encourage this playfulness, and it's a general saying that you cannot really do it wrong. Of course, that's a lie. You can easily do it wrong, but as long as you play within that frame that's given, basically everything is allowed. It is easy to participate. We try to say it's sort of plug and play. You go there, and somebody tells you what you have to do, and as long as you do that, you're fine. So it's not something that you need to develop some kind of skill to be a part of it. The only requirement is when you go there, you wear black clothing. And then, as in this picture, if the game designer or LARP designer decides that you need to wear something else, they will supply it to you. Then it is emotional, it's physical. It's a lot of these subjects that are being treated in these Blackbox Larps are emotionally heavy subjects. And you get somewhat intimate with your co-players in the sense that many of the Larps are very like bodily and physical. You need to move around a lot and hold hands, or I don't know, even more physical stuff. And then finally, I'd say it's artistic and somewhat otherworldly in the sense that a theater scene, a theater room, you take out a lot of distracting things so that it's more rough. It's empty of distractions, and that somehow gives you some kind of otherworldly feel to it. Also, many of the subjects and many of the themes of the game of the Larps are more abstract than you would normally see at a LARP. From the designer's perspective, what is the Blackbox Larp? And this list here is some of the constraints that we tell Blackbox Larp designers when they want to come and make a LARP. We say, okay, so it needs to fulfill this here, or at least some of them we tell them, and some of them are more implicitly assumed. So Blackbox Larps use theatrical ways of expression, meaning theatrical light, sounds, the theater room itself, props of different kinds, sometimes costumes, sometimes just this black clothing. Blackbox Larps use a confined space, that is the theater room, and that's to set it apart from other LARPs that will happen, for instance, in the forest. There's no real confinement. Of course, there would be some edges to the forest, but it's a more vast space, so you can go beyond the borders of where the LARP action actually happens. That you cannot do here. You're confined to this black room. Blackbox Larps can be played by anyone, is one of our credos, which basically means that anyone can come from the street, walk in and be told, this is how you should do, and then do it. You don't need to have a certain skill or be a long time LARP or be proficient in other ways of theatrical expression. Blackbox Larps will enable their players on site, and usually that's done through a workshop or some exercises before the LARP. People are being told what to play. They will exercise some of it. They will try different formats until they feel and so it's ready to go in and play. Usually those workshops will last like 1 or 2 hours. Blackbox Larps are aesthetic. I will get back to all of these in detail, but this generally just means that it should be somehow an aesthetic experience to look at and be part of. And also Blackbox Larps use another set of aesthetics than other Larps, which is interesting. I'll get back to that. And Blackbox Larps are experimental. They are not that by design, but we as a community try to enforce all the time that you play with it, you try something out. It's okay to try and fail. So generally we try to provoke people to try something new. So each of those we'll go into detail now. So theatrical lights, Blackbox Larps use those to direct what is going, or sometimes just to illuminate the room, and then some action happens there. But it happens inside a theater room, so you use those lights, as you can see in on the picture there. It requires some skill in stagecraft to be able to handle those lights and other theater equipment. Therefore, many Blackbox Larps will have a theater technician to help in running the LARP, or sometimes even to help in designing it. Also, at least some theater technicians have a growing interest in Blackbox Larps because it's a playground for what they do professionally. When we're talking about lights, then colored lights, I would say colors matter. This picture here, you can see that this is a black and white, basically, except for man's bloods. So different colors of light are typically used in these Blackbox Larps to convey different emotions, feelings, or sometimes a certain color will tell how you should play, if you should play a certain way. And even sometimes the absence of color or contrast between colors are used to emphasize something specific, as in this picture here. So colored lights is something that we play around with a lot. Also, lighting design in general is I would say, one of the major design disciplines in designing a Blackbox Larp. And I've written some points to consider here. Of course, scene illumination, that is just putting some light inside the room so that people can see what they're doing. But you can do that in many different ways. You can make some kind of effect lighting that when something specific happens, we will turn on a certain light. We can use colored lights to convey different feelings or convey a certain play style that all of a sudden you should all be sad or something like that. Light intensity can be used to focus on different areas in the black box, or focus on different objects or different specific persons. That if one person is specifically interesting at this very moment, we will focus more light on that person. Gobos is something that has been played around with a little bit. A gobo is framing the light in a certain way so it looks like an image of some kind. And you can play with that. Real light is basically you take a lamp or a candle inside the black box area. So that is both the prop in the game, and also it is something that produces light on the stage. And then, of course, you can play with different angles on the light, or light, different shadows or absence of light in particular. And those are a lot of the points that you can play around with to make the design that you desire for your larp. Audio is also a design subject. It has not received that much attention compared to the lighting, but from time to time you get audio designers in and they do something magical. And again, there are some points that you can play around with. Some soundtrack theme songs have been used a lot. Ambience have been used. Different jingles to convey different scenes or different emotions, that when you hear this jingle you should do this and this. Real sound could be, well, it basically is you take sound from other places and put it in. Some have played around with recordings of the players themselves and then playing it back at them, or for instance distorted or with a delay, so that they will have echo or something like that. Speak, that you have a narrator telling a story while the player's playing. Live music has been done. Live recordings, also recordings from other places being played into the room. Yeah. And then there's a bunch of other theater techniques that you can use, and some of them we have played with, some not. And I give a very small list. Projections, like, from image projections, has been used a lot. Smoke has been used to some degree, dry ice as well. Pyrotechnics, not so much, because it requires at least some kind of skill to do that, and also there's some kind of safety issues. UV lights has been played with a little bit, and you can do interesting stuff with that. And also there's a whole a long list of theater tech that you can apply that has not been tried now, wire techniques and all that stuff. The more advanced tech you use, though, the more proficient you need to be as a theater technician, or generally just as techie. So therefore, there is a bar to what you can do, because well, most people are not educated techies. And then props and costumes are also used in Blackbox Larps, though not as much. Design tradition in Blackbox Larps, even though it's only 5 years old, generally say that a minimum of props should be used. That's at least how it's commonly done. So you take only the most necessary props. That in this case, this sword means something specific. So therefore, that is in the game. While other props and it's just taken out to sort of keep it as simple as possible. The same goes for costumes. Generally, you would see that compared to other larps, costumes are basically lacking here. You don't use them. Although, just like the props, if there's something specific that you need to illustrate about a certain person, that person will have a certain piece of the costume. It could be a certain jacket or a certain hat or something like that. So costumes are more conceptual or something, or abstract. That was the word. You just take a certain prop or thing to illustrate this is a costume. So generally, participants are required to show black clothes, and for most LARPs, that is also what they will wear in the LARP. And then there's this thing about the closed space or the confined space, which is the black box room. A closed or confined space is a general design concept in LARP. It is when the actions within that space is the only thing that matters for the LARP. So you can imagine that LARPs portray a wide world, and you focus on just this narrow space, but whatever happens in the rest of the world is really not important, and that would be defined as a closed space. So everything that happens in the LARP is what is relevant to the LARP, nothing more. All black box LARPs are closed space by necessity. That means the theater room limits the space. That is not entirely true, because you can easily imagine a LARP played inside a black box room that has influence that from other places. You can imagine a room or a LARP where people all have cell phones, and you receive calls from outside people acting as their moms or whatever, calling them inside the LARP, and then that would actually breach the boundaries of the closed space. So it's closed in many sense. It's not just, we're not just talking about the walls around the room. We're talking about what actually happens inside the room. So black box LARP are traditionally closed spaces. Being so closed spaces, and this theater room has sparked some interest in what we call spatial design. Spatial design is not just a topic in Blackbox Larps, but it is generally in the LARP community, it is a new trend. People are talking about it, and specifically in Blackbox Larps, it has received some attention. And spatial design is simply a focus on designing the physical space of where you are, so that to optimize possibilities for that desired interaction you want to have in the LARP that you're designing. So it's simply a means of looking at the space where you play and making sure that that space facilitates your play in the best way. And some of the things you can use to make this spatial design is, of course, paths. Where will people move? Which paths will they move along? Doors, probably more in the abstract sense, since we're playing inside just one room. But as you can see here in this picture, there are some wide lines and here and there are empty spaces or holes in those wide lines, which will mean this is a door. You can walk here and not over the lines. Spaces where people meet. Walls, again, wide lines here, so it's more of an abstract thinking. Then lights or theater lights to illuminate specific areas inside the room and say this space over here is something specific. We can even make it a color space. Say if you go to that specific place which has the red light, you have to do something specific. stage elements, quite common to use. Those are big platforms that you can assemble them and put them together and somehow make some kind of structure inside the room. And scenography in general, even though scenography, just like props and costumes, is typically rather limited. And then there's these pre-larp workshops. Pre-larp workshops are designed to enable participants to play your LARP. It is an organized set of introductions and exercises that will prepare the players for your LARP. And I would say that designing a pre-LARP workshop is at least as challenging as designing the LARP itself. And for many LARP designers, the design of the pre-LARP workshop is both an integrated part of the LARP design and also sometimes even the most essential part in the design. What you do at these pre-LARP workshops is prepare the players who are then going to go in there and play what you have designed for them. And so the design of the workshop will simply, if you design it good, then people will go in and do what you want them to do. And if you design it bad, then they would go in and do something else. So therefore, the pre-LARP workshop is that's the grip that the LARP designers will have of players, because usually when they then enter the Blackbox Larp space, then you will just release them and then see what happens. And if, for instance, if you go to this the summer school, a lot of focus is put into how to design a workshop, deciding what to do before the actual game. Of course, it's not entirely true that when the players have completed this pre-LARP workshop and then you release them into the Blackbox area, then they're just on the loose. You still have some tools to influence them with, and that is something we would call runtime game mastering, or facilitating a Blackbox Larp. And usually that will require some runtime control of lights and sounds, projections, and all other elements of the LARP you have designed. It could be something as simple as making sure that that exact prop they need to use halfway into the game, into the LARP, is handed to them at the exact right time. That is also runtime game mastering. So it's not only facilitating lights and sounds. Usually you have a theater technician to run the more advanced parts, like the lights and the sounds. Or you have designed it so simple that you can yourself control the faders and make sure that the right light is where it is needed. I would say facilitating a Blackbox Larp. It generally feels like in game mastering that you're regulating what people are doing in the Blackbox Larp area, and you usually see players respond very promptly to the inputs you give. Right. Once you change a light from one color to the other, you will see an instant response from the players. And even if you haven't told what different colors mean, just something is happening, something is changing inside the room, they will do something. So, and sometimes the players are probably, they're not even aware that their behavior is changing when you give them certain inputs. But you can see it when you see it from the outside. So I like to do that a lot. And then aesthetics. I said earlier that Blackbox Larps are an aesthetic experience. With that I mean it is not just a role-playing experience, it is also something that you can go into and experience as something beautiful, for instance. So, how it looks, how the lights are made, and that thing is also something you can go in and appreciate in other ways than just play inside it. You can say it's meant to be perceived as a work of art. Some would say that's stretching, but let's just say again, it could be a work of art. Also, Blackbox Larps employs another set of aesthetics that is different from other LARPs. And by that I mean that most other LARPs, they will go for an aesthetic that is, for instance, realism. They try to make everything as real as possible. You're creating this imaginary universe, for instance, a fantasy LARP, but then you try to put as much realism inside your LARP so that it's more believable and people should believe that they're inside this fantasy world, for instance. Blackbox Larps basically go the other way and say we're removing as many different things from that realism feeling and giving people more a feeling of abstractness. I'm not sure what the word would be, or a feeling of theatricalness, something like that, which is the aesthetics of a black box. You will also see that same kind of aesthetics being used in black box theater, in basically most theater plays. Yes. And then experimentalism. As I say, we strive to keep the black box community as experimental and playful as we can. That is, we're constantly trying to tell designers to try something new or go with some kind of idea and just see what happens. And we try to say it's okay to try something and fail. You don't have to make it perfect every time, because we want the community and the LARPs are being designed to evolve and for interesting new ideas to happen and people to inspire each other with different new ideas. So we try to push for this experimentalism, and by that we say that when you design a LARP, you don't have to write anything down. You don't have to document it in any way. The only thing we're expecting of you is that you come yourself to that whatever venue that the LARP is at and run it yourself. So we want the person that has designed the LARP also to come and run it and facilitate it. Or at least send someone who they feel are proficient to carry out that LARP design that you have made to a certain extent. Even though the Blackbox community is growing more and more diverse, as I said earlier, I cannot even keep track of the many venues that has Blackbox Larps nowadays. There's still like a we, as the community, are striving to do something. So Blackbox Larping is like in that area between being completely diverse, nobody knows what the others are doing, and there's still some kind of community that is, people are talking to each other, just maybe just a little bit still, and therefore we can still have this drive towards experiment. Then there's something called the audience problem, because it has been experimented with. There's been experimentation with audience before. Since the Blackbox Larp it happens inside a theater room, it is easy to think, okay, so we could invite some kind of audience in to see what we're doing, and basically treat this Blackbox Larping as some kind of weird theater. But this has turned out to be more complicated than we would think. I've written that most audience find it boring to look at Blackbox Larp. That's true. Most players find it annoying to have somebody looking at them. That's also true, but this is not the only problem with this here. It's also a problem of when you invite an audience in, they generally have no idea what's going on, because the players will usually focus more inwards towards themselves and each other. So as a LARP tradition goes, players are not accustomed to showing themselves off towards an audience. So the audience, they don't know what's going on. And then when you try to open up and make some kind of design where the play is conveyed more outwards towards some kind of audience, most players find that annoying, because then they get the feel that they're not playing for their own pleasure and their own experience. They're playing for somebody else's pleasure, and that generally is not what they wanted to do. So there has been some experimentation of in the ways of how can these still invite some people in and experience this here, while not destroying the feelings or the play for the players. And the picture here is from one of the more interesting experiments in that regard. It's from the Law of Fragile Life, Souls Gone Missing, where audience was invited in wearing these kind of masks here, and they could go into the actual play area instead of just sitting and looking at it, and then they could actually try to, play a little bit with the players in there that was playing the Larp. So the audience was some kind of entity, people just walking around inside the play area. Yes, well, it's interesting, but there's definitely a lot more experimentation going on in that regard. And why? Because if you invite audience in, they will pay for it, and thus you get more money. So and more money to experiment with other things. So it's a ways to have more people seeing and experiencing the LARP or the art piece, which is then becoming when you invite the audience in. And so it becomes more visible to the public. And then, since Blackbox Larps started some 5 years ago, or more, since 2010, anyways, there are two trends in Blackbox Larp design has emerged. I would say those two, there are trends in how you design for the social interaction in the LARP. And the two trends I've named the sensational LARP style and the thematical LARP style. And the sensational LARPs, they will focus on some kind of emotion or sensation that the players are meant to experience and explore. For those LARPs, there's typically very little or even no verbal communication between the players. And typically there's some kind of physical constraint to players' movements. Either they have to move in a certain way, or there are places where they can go and places where they can't go, and something like that. And or if they go a certain place, they have to act a certain way. Some kind of constraint in those ways. Most of these LARPs, the intention is that the emotions or the sensation is something that happens inside your own head, and your interpretation of what is going on can be completely, or it is completely individual, and it's usually also completely different from what the other person who plays just next to you is experiencing. And yeah, that's a LARP style that is unique to Blackbox Larps. I would say you find it no other place in the LARP community. The thematical LARPs are LARPs that focus on a theme or a specific setting that is explored during play. Themes are typically very heavy emotional subjects. They're typically also kind of abstract, as opposed to more real or physical situations. An abstract theme could be like loneliness, or from the picture here, the theme I would say is war, or civilians during the war in this case. Those two traditions inside Blackbox Larps are both trending a lot. You see a lot of LARPs that fall into one of these two categories. And then there are, of course, other types of LARPs that's not trending as much. One of them is one of my personal favorites, is the narrative LARP, where the focus is on telling a story through the LARP. And typically, those LARPs will have a frame of a story already laid out before the game, and sometimes it's conveyed to the players during the pre-LARP workshop, sometimes it is not. But it is typically always laid out in a set of predefined scenes that the players need to act out. So they will act out the scenes, and then they will fill in the gaps and sort of make a story come together by filling in the gaps. So they will make the story whole. There are some Larps in this tradition also played in the Blackbox Larps, but they're few and far between. And of course, there are even more rare examples of Larp styles that can be found inside the Blackbox Larping community, but is more dominant in other places. So this is it. Blackbox Larp is now its own style of larping. I would say we have come to that since its beginning 5 years ago. Popularity is increasing, and it is played in more and more places. Yet it is still in the pioneering phase, and there's still a lot to be done. And we are seeing an increased increasing interest from other areas. I've written here theater and improv artists, but also other theater people in general, specifically theater technicians who find it interesting that they can play around with the stuff that they work with professionally and so on. And all of a sudden here comes a playground where they can just do interesting stuff, but other areas as well. So Blackbox Larp is somewhere in between a lot of different disciplines, and that has sparked interest from many different areas. But to really know what Blackbox Larps are, you need to try it. And therefore I have just written a few events coming up the next year or so. Blackbox Copenhagen, which is here in Copenhagen, 23rd to 25th of September. Grænselandet, which is in Oslo, 28th to 29th of October. Blackbox Horsens next year, 10th to 12th of February. Also, there's this summer school that I've been talking about. It is sometime during summer, but the space is already filled up. Yeah. And well, that's basically it. And so here are some more interesting and nice pictures. Generally, I wanted to make this presentation with a lot of beautiful pictures because, well, it's inspirational. When people have something good to look at from different Larps that we've made. Yep, that's it. Questions? No? Okay, but then we're actually also out of time.